Hello and welcome to the second episode of What Happens in Marketing, brought to you by the Las Vegas Innovative Marketing Association. Hello, I'm Tom Heaton, here today to join you again for another great conversation. If you missed our first one, we had a fantastic chat with Steve Mayer of the NHL and Justin Cohen of REQ, talking about all things with the All-Star Game. I'm excited today because we're going to get a chance to chat about employment branding and what that means for the future. As we know that we're kind of walking into this, call it unprecedented world, where we're going to be discovering new things about what happens with the future of remote work and where we go from there. Also, one of the hot topics that's out there of DEI and what that means from an employment branding standpoint, and what you as an employer can do to really be able to make employees, A, want to work for you, B, want to stay with you, and also attract that talent that's out there that's going to help your company grow. So as we do that, I'm really excited to be able to be joined by one of our longtime advisors, a good friend of LVIMA and myself, Miss Lynn Ingham of Digital Talent Guide, is here to talk about what's really her wheelhouse. She's an expert in this field, and I'm excited because we get to ask questions that I'm curious to hear the answers to. I'm curious to hear what she brings to the table on some of these answers. So please join me in welcoming Miss Lynn Ingham.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So as we get into this, Lynn, I'd say let's start off by even just discussing the topic of what is employment branding? What does this mean compared to like a regular brand? How would you classify that?
Sure. Happy to talk about that. It's something that's on my mind a lot because when I take on a client, I take on very few clients because it's been kind of a crazy ride and everybody's doing a lot of hiring and you have to be really discerning. And when I take on clients, one of the things I think about, because I know it's going to either help or hinder my recruiting efforts, is how well have they taken care of their employment branding. And it's different in that branding tells people about what your company is all about, and product, services. It even can incorporate mission and goals. But employment branding is, what is it like to work here? Like, what do you offer people in this really competitive environment that would be really helpful when they're trying to make a decision between the two or three companies that are very likely vying for their talent? If they're in the market at this moment in time, they're in the driver's seat. So before I came on this call, I did some research about. I thought, I've seen some examples of people who do a really good job at this, and I brought some of those to talk to you guys about today. But the bottom line is, why do you do this? Why would you need to do this? And the answer is, people have a lot of choices about where they're going to go to work right now, and you want the best talent you can possibly find. And if you want to get that talent, you've got to make sure that you look like a really good place to work and that you are a good place to work. It's not smoke and mirrors. It needs to be really authentic.
Yeah, for sure. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the brands that we bring to the table as far as how are we going to get a consumer to engage with our product. And it's very crucial that we consider, how do we get somebody to make that commitment that they may be thinking about from a brand and a purchase and a product side of things. The commitment to work someplace is even greater than that. And so really leveraging that brand emphasis and knowing what it is that it means to be an employee of your company and being able to represent that in a way that people are attracted to it. It's so critical at this day and age, especially as we start to talk about the world is expanding. You can work for a lot of different companies in a lot of different places that you couldn't work before. Now, all of a sudden, that talent is dispersed. It's a lot more competitive. There's a lot different set of benefits as the world's been kind of upended in this employment branding space in the last couple of years. And so now it gives us that opportunity to kind of reset and say, okay, what is it that is going to really define employment branding? What are the key factors that we need to be considering when we're looking at employment branding as we go forward? So, Lynn, you mentioned a couple examples of people that are doing it right. Can you give me a few of those, of people that are brands that really have this employment branding thing nailed?
Sure. In fact, I'm going to do a deeper dive, I think, on just one, because They're doing it so well that almost everybody I saw around that sort of pales by comparison. And just to before I even talk about this, one of the things that you have to think about is in the old days. That's what we call pre-COVID. I think now is the old days. You can actually go. There was the before, and now we're in the. I think we're still in the middle. I don't think we're in the after yet, but we're getting there. Um, you could go an interview consisted of you figuring out what to wear because you were going to the campus and you were going to go or to the office or whatever it is and you were going to go talk to people and you were going to spend some time with them and you're going to sit down and you're going to take all those cues that you take when you go in person and you're going to look around and all that's gone. I mean, many people are interviewing for going through the entire process, showing up to work for brands that they don't ever even visit the campus. I mean, sooner or later they visit the campus, but sometimes not even in the interview process. Oh, here's my cat going to make a little appearance for us. Oh,
Nice
there you
guest appearance. I love it.
go. So,
Right. And that's a great example right there. You've got to be prepared for anything that could happen. I mean, we've seen these viral videos now of people that are in interviews, and all of a sudden you got a kid that walks through the background. He stands up and he's wearing shorts, and it's like,
or no shorts.
the little thing. Right, well, yeah, I haven't seen those. I don't watch those kind of videos.
So to talk, the nice part about this is one of our the LVIMA board members works at this brand, and I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't really try and tie it in, but it ties in very nicely. I remembered visiting Spotify at some point, and I thought I'm going to go back and look at what they're doing here now because they used to be good at it before COVID. Like, what are they doing now? And they have this whole site, and it's called Life at Spotify, and it's brilliant actually because you go there if you're interested in going to work for Spotify, and if you just want to look at a job, that's the first thing that comes up. So you can just pick a city, pick a job, whatever. You can just go right there. But if you're actually, before you're going to pick that job, want to do some thinking about what's it like to work at Spotify, they have all these sections that you can navigate to when you go to Life at Spotify. And the first one is this whole thing about location. So instead of listing offices and addresses, they have in video tours, and you can walk around the offices behind the camera and you can see people working in different work environments, and you can see what the views are from the New York World Trade Center office, and you can see what it feels like. You can get kind of a much more visceral sense of working there. So that's one of the things they do, and I think
That's
pretty
really cool.
easy for people to do, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, walk around with your camera and just get some video, be able to capture that day in the life. I like it.
And so you live there a little bit. And then there's this next section, it's called Being There. And that's all about the company has a brand manifesto, and it's titled This Is How We Rock, which is completely in line, once again, with their brand, music brand. This is how we rock. And it talks about their mission and their company values. So, you get a good sense of how do they think about the company from an employee standpoint. Why is it important? How do people feel about working there? And then they have a whole section on diversity, equity, and they call it impact. Their third word is impact. We call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion for DEI.
Yeah.
But then they put up all their DEI initiatives. One is mental health, one is diversity, inclusion, and belonging, one is climate action. What young person is not interested in the state of the world as it relates to climate? One is racial equality, super important for everybody in this current day and age. And then the last one is social impact. So then you get this deep dive on what are they doing about DEI, not just what do they say about it, but what are some of the initiatives that they have going there? And then one of the last things, they do two more things. They have a section called students. And this is something that I think companies think far too little about. When really smart students are coming out of college, you want to have a program, if you're a company that's big enough that can afford this, you want to have a program that makes them feel like they're welcome. And so not only do you want that, but you want to have that accessible. And so
Hmm.
they have a whole section where students come in and they woo them, and they woo them with really serious descriptions, many of them, of the kind of programs that students can join. One of them is a 10 to 13 week summer internship. Another one is a 15-month aspiring marketer professionals program. Um, a term limits program where they can try something out with them. There's an 18-week technology fellowship program for aspiring engineers, probably the hardest talent to hire on the planet,
Yep.
and more. So there's another section. These are things we'll do for you if you're a student. And then the last one, they're very, very clear about what their hiring process is like. You come
Hmm.
in, you present your resume, you talk to people. This is the process you go through, and then we hire you. And so it's also, it's like saying, come in. It's like opening the door. It's showing you pictures of a lifestyle. It's painting a picture of what it looks like. It's painting the picture of how it feels to be there. And it's welcoming you. And I think that's just world class. And, anybody could take hints from that. Size of company, it wouldn't matter. There are pieces of that would really help everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the way that I'm hearing that is you want to show them the experience. You want to be able to tell them what you do and basically why you do what you do. Then you want to really be able to show and like highlight your beliefs essentially as a company, that belief system, the DEI aspect of your business there, and then woo them. And I think that it's great that you hit on that for the students, but I think that's just a good lesson for all of us. Of woo your prospective employees. If you're looking to try to bring in a specific group, make assets, create different things that would be attractive to them, woo them to come in and engage with you. And then I think that last part, be very clear about your hiring process. I think all too often, and especially I would say in the last 2 years, we've seen hiring processes get upended because there was a process that was in place, but it involved bringing them down to the office or campus, doing an interview. Maybe it's an in-phone or over the phone interview, then an in-person interview, and then a final interview with leadership or things like that. Now all of a sudden it's, well, you got to do a remote interview, and how many interviews are you going to do? And a lot of people maybe haven't committed fully to the remote only interview process because, hey, we're going to go back someday. But now, I think it's a good opportunity for all of us to take a look at it and say, okay, really, what is this hiring process and what are we going to commit to going forward? Because as you put it, Lynn, I mean, we're not even at the end of this. We're probably in the middle of it, and who knows what the end is actually going to look like. So it's a good opportunity for all of us as employers to be able to think about how the process plays into the brand. I think that's a really smart way of looking at it. Thank you for bringing that example up for us. I think it's a great way of looking at it.
Can I say one more thing on that, Tom, before we move on? What I also want to say is, so I would be interested. This is a question I have that I don't have the answer to. In how many Spotify employees know that this part of their site exists? And hopefully it's all of them, but probably not because they have tons and tons and tons of people working for them. So, I mean, they list like something like 606 open jobs in 35 locations. So, but one of the things I want to say about that is more and more relatively new employees are being involved in the interview process. Very few of them are being trained. Some of my clients ask me to train their employees, especially their newer or younger professionals, on how to interview somebody. It's a simple ask. It doesn't take very long. It's not rocket science. Oh, there's my kitty again. Sorry, Dickens. Um, it's not rocket science, but they should all know about this amazing resource, and they should be empowered to share it, because it doesn't matter, and we'll talk about this again and again today. It doesn't matter how well a company thinks about these things if they don't have buy-in from almost every level of their company. It won't be as successful as it will be if they spend a few minutes making sure that everybody at Spotify understands this is a resource they can share.
Yeah, absolutely. And that employer branding, or call it employment branding, I think really extends to the current employees too. And that's where when you really see it working well, you know that the current employees that you have working for you buy into that brand of what does it mean to work here. And that really echoes then through this ability to be able to identify resources that exist, be able to share those out with the world, be proud about it. Hey, look at me, in this video we did a walkthrough of the office, and here you can see where I live and work basically. And then have that also ability to be able to go beyond that and identify, okay, what are the questions that we care about? When talking about the interview process, if the employment branding is lined up all the way through the bottom, top to bottom, then the employees know what is important to be an employee there, and they can ask questions that help identify that. It helps align everybody so that you're also not getting a situation where now all of a sudden you've got 5 interviews and the same question is asked in every single interview, but people understand how to ask a question that matters to the particular conversation that they're having. And that makes for a better employee hiring process, which then is going to result in better employees. Yeah, I love it. But as part of that, you mentioned a little bit that I think it's cool that Spotify has a different way that they're looking at DEI. DEI in general, though, is something that we've seen gain more and more momentum through a lot of different employer branding opportunities. And I'm curious, from your side of things, where have you seen it really work well for companies?
Yeah, no, here's another one where um, we talk about it like it's this sort of monolithic thing, DEI, when it's really this very multifaceted initiative, set of initiatives, programs, groups. It's a big nut to tackle, and so we've conveniently, as we're wont to do in our industry, given it three initials and think then it's one thing, but it's a bunch of things. It's about race, gender, identity, ethnicity, abilities, disabilities, religion, culture, age, sexual orientation, diverse working environments. So when I give you some examples, they won't be any. There are no examples that exist. I can promise you this, of somebody who's doing everything right, because it's just too hard. But there are people. It's just too. It's massive. And Tom, that I'm famous for always saying, okay, pick your top three, do them well, then move on to your next three. Or pick your top two, do them well. Because if you try and do everything at the same time well, you'll fail at miserably sort of at them all. And it's DEI is one of those things. It's like so big. But you can chip away at it. And before we even talk about some companies who are doing well, and I have some, let's talk about why you want to do this again, just like employer branding. Why is it important? It's super important, not only because it will get you a better workforce, a more diverse workforce, but I mean, statistics show that, you know, um, companies that really focus on diversity and inclusion, about a third of them do better, have better profitability, have better employee retention. It's just good for business. When you do the right thing, it's just good for business. And to do the right thing, diversity, equality, inclusion, equity, inclusion, it's just saying hire people from all walks of life. Make sure you are an open platform for people to come and work for you so that you get the best talent no matter who they are. And really, because they are different, they will give you a better and stronger workforce. Um, and again, why this is important: super tight talent market. Two-thirds of candidates look for diversity and inclusion, look for DEI strength in a company and when they weigh job options. So you're going to be evaluated on these initiatives, whether you want to be or not. And there are lots of things you kind of need to do in order to get ready for that. And there are companies that are helping you do that, and I can talk about some of them today. And Glassdoor is among them. So let's not forget the Glassdoor piece if I get carried away. Okay. So, but one of the companies, Well, there are so many initiatives that, I mean, all you have to do is start Googling DEI, diversity, inclusion, and you can begin to come up with a ton of resources. But I can, short circuit to a few of them that I think are really interesting. And one of them is in October of 2020, Fortune magazine partnered with a company, it's a financial market data company called Refinitiv. And they started to add with Refinitiv data a part of the Fortune 500 measuring ranking called Measure Up. And it's really aimed at, it's powered by Refinitiv's ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance data, to help business leaders, really tackle this diversion and this DEI initiative in their companies. And they established a bunch of metrics. And so not only when Fortune publishes their Fortune 500, do you learn about their financial profitability, all that kind of thing. You'll now see this new Measure Up, which talks about how are they working on social justice, equality, how is that measuring up in the company. Now, here's a caveat. Most companies don't publish this data. And so, once again, transparency is something that we have to work towards. We're not there yet. Companies have to get really much more open about talking about who works for them, what their initiatives are to attract those workers, et cetera, because they have like 14 points and only a handful of companies provided more than 1 point of that data. So this is embryonic. It's brand new. It's just getting started. It'll get much stronger as people begin to apply or comply. But one of the companies that came up really well, in fact, they came up number one overall, is Microsoft. And so here we go, have this huge, massive company, and they're doing really, really well on things like providing daycare services. They have ERGs, employment resource groups on DEI, voluntarily formed by workers to work on this internally. They set targets to be achieved on diversity and inclusion. They have a policy about gender diversity. They have a policy to promote diversity and inclusion. Okay, so they're doing really, really well on racial diversity. According to 2020 reported data, 40% of the company's board is made up of racial and ethnic minorities. The workforce as a whole is 49.8, almost 50% racial or ethnic majorities. Based on the same data, their managers are 41.3% are from racial or ethnic minorities. So super good there, right? Okay, but we all know Microsoft. Where are they failing miserably? Can you think about this?
Well, I guess I was going to say one of two things, either maybe gender or abilities, I guess, or disabilities.
Gender.
Am I gender? Okay.
Totally.
All right.
Did you think about
Yeah,
technology and you think about how male dominated it is? And,
absolutely. Yep.
28% of its employees are women, 26% of its
Wow.
managers are women. And so
Yeah.
here we go. They still rank number one. And that's to go back to my original point. This is such a
Yep.
complex data set that they're failing kind of miserably on one, but they're doing
Hmm.
well enough on another that it pops them up to the top of the list. And so this is
Yeah.
not to fault Microsoft because they're doing a lot of it right.
Yeah. They're
But
still number one.
they're still number one. So,
Yeah.
but they're not doing this right. And
Hmm.
so that's why this is not one of those one topic, discussions. It's like this is complex.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think there's a really important message there, and it's twofold. If you're an employer listening to this right now and thinking, I don't even have a DEI plan. First off, you just heard that one of the largest employers in the world, who's ranked number one in this scale, still has issues that they're working on. So you can start to work on your issues, and you're not far behind. The first step is really just getting started on that. And then the other side of that is it's an opportunity for you to say, if you're an employer that you have a great DEI policy, let's not get hung up on this idea that it's perfect, that
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be changed. Let's think about how we can evolve and evaluate and continue to innovate. As we talk to this audience of innovators out here, think about how you can innovate those internal policies to be able to continue to look upon yourselves and kind of do some inward reflection of the company policies to say, hey, where could we get better? Because this is going to be a long journey for everybody. It's really more about how do you continue to improve rather than the finish line in this case.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And, to go back to some companies who are doing some really cool things, one of the highlights from the Glassdoor, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is doing a few things really, really well. And
Mm-hmm.
one of them is, and you have to just search for this guide. I mean, it's just incredible. They have really rich DEI resources, but you have to kind of, go through their site and figure out how to get to their tutorials and on and on. So I would just say Google Glassdoor diversity, equity, and inclusion. And
Yeah.
what you see when you look up companies now in Glassdoor, you'll see underneath there's a DEI score, and they are working really hard to not only talk about their companies, but to talk about how well these companies are addressing this important issue. And they have, so definitely look there and take a look at the fact that they're starting to score this. Again, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
hard, not a lot of transparency, but it's a start. And this guide has really practical suggestions. It's really multifaceted. It shows a lot of examples, and I can talk about them if we have time. If not,
Mm-hmm.
you can look them up. But it's how to set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion program at your company, how to hire a head of diversity or a chief diversity officer if you're big enough that that's the size the initiative needs to be. If not, you can do a employee resource group that with
Mm-hmm.
volunteers from your company who want to work on this together. There are ways to have this without having a chief diversity officer, but if you want to hire one, they have really good, feedback on how to look for that, how to build that ERG program. You see a lot about
Mm-hmm.
ERGs, and it's all they really are affinity groups. Well, I shouldn't say all they are. These are big, important groups, but they're affinity
Yeah.
groups in the company where Black employees may get together to talk about their own initiatives or inclusion or things that they would like to bring together as a group to the company, or gay and lesbian, or Asian, or just people with disabilities. And so, how to set up an employee resource group program, how to attract people to that, how to get them excited about, belonging, and how to set goals, how to set, really concrete examples of how you can begin by setting diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and how to build
Mm-hmm.
out your employee recruitment capabilities. One of the easiest ways to do that is tap your minority candidates and ask them who they would recommend for the job. Very few times are they asked for suggestions about who you should go after and hire, and they're the best resource for that. So
Yep.
there are lots of good things that they're doing. I mean, they for a while I often wondered, why did they even exist. It was really, they weren't really with the program, and now they are so with the program. It's like escaped me how far they've come into this modern world, and what a good job they're doing at it.
Yeah, that's great. We'll make sure that we get the link to that resource guide there. I think you really hit on it, and I hope that this is a piece that's in there. But I think just establishing what your DEI goals are as a brand is a great first step. Yeah, because then from there, everything else can start to fall in line. If you can identify those and you can spread those out throughout the rest of your company, then it gives you that North Star to basically be able to say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then everything else kind of falls back in line behind that. I love the idea there. One of the pieces that we see that, we talk about this being a long journey, the next kind of call it section of road that we see coming up ahead of us is this transition for a lot of companies from remote. Essentially, we went from this world where a lot of people were working in an office. We had some companies that did remote and they were doing it pretty well. Now, all of a sudden, everybody had to go remote for a short period of time. Some people came back and some people are doing a hybrid model. We're seeing now these instances where companies are doing it well when they come back into the remote, the non-remote world. Some companies are struggling with it, and I've even seen examples where there's companies that have specifically put out flyers or put out like LinkedIn posts that say, yeah, hey, listen, if your company is taking you from remote back into the office and you don't want to go back to the office, well, then come work for us. We're always going to be remote and things like that. It's interesting to see how this next section of this transition is going to impact a lot of people. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts, Lynn, as we think about how we transition from remote back into the office. What are some of the key elements that you would say are really important for us as employers to be considering?
So, this is probably the thorniest issue that we have to talk about today. It should be the easiest, given the
Mm-hmm.
other two topics, which are major, but this is probably the thorniest and the most difficult because the problem is I talk to candidates all day long. I mean, that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to candidates all day long. And a handful of them want to go back to the office. I mean, just a handful. The
Mm-hmm.
majority of them want to work fully remotely. Somewhere in between, there are the people who miss the office culture, but like the convenience of remote working, and so they lean towards hybrid. So, which is the right answer? I can't I can't tell you that because it depends on your company. And one example of that is, one of my agencies, I work for an ad agency, bought a building before COVID, and they own 2 floors of it in a very nice part of a very nice city. And they seat 80 employees. They have 6 outer offices, and this is their main headquarters. And they have six
Mm-hmm.
offices across the country. They started by bringing back 40 because they can, distance. They can, and those 40 come back as they're hand raisers, and they come back, only because they want to.
Mm-hmm.
The people that rushed back into the office were the creatives because they like to work in an environment where they can whiteboard, where they can talk to one another, where they can really share ideas, and they feel like they need to do that in person. So, one thing I would think about is which of your employees will most benefit by bringing back? And that should be the first group you bring back because if you feel like you're going to have to bring them back all back over time, at least start with your lowest hanging fruit, meaning those who really want to come back. Start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
that's a great suggestion. Yep.
that's one thing. Another thing is be very, very clear about your policy. Now that's easy to say and hard to do. But
Mm-hmm.
I've seen big companies, and I will name one because they're in the news. I'm not like ratting anybody out. But I know a number of people who work for Google, and
Mm-hmm.
they left New York and they left San Francisco to work remotely during COVID, mainly because it was cheaper and less scary in more remote places where they didn't have to worry about being in a congested city and they could just live a little bit easier. But truthfully, they don't. Some of them found that they don't want to go back to the city. They've mostly had 3 different, you have to be back by this date, you have to be back by this date, you have to be back by this date, all of which were moving targets. Again, not Google's fault, the fault of the pandemic, really. But nobody's clear on if they have to go back, when they have to go back, why they have to go back. It hasn't been a great, smooth communications process. And I think their employees would be much happier if they could just kind of tighten that up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point there. And it's something that I'd go back to similar to DEI. It's important to stop for a second and think about what are your goals? What are the goals of bringing the office back to life? Is it for a creative space, yes, you want to have people bouncing ideas off of each other. Is it a culture thing? Is it just because, hey, this is the way that it was and we want to go back to the way that it was? And that third option, I think that's going to get a lot of static in the world. I think that you've got to have a stronger reason for going back to the office other than, hey, we want to go back to the before times. Because I think a lot of people have seen now that, hey, this is possible. I don't have to do an hour and a half long commute to get to my job. I can do my job here and I can spend that hour and a half with my kids, with my family, on a hobby that I've grown to start enjoying here. All of these things that have given us time back in, we need to be able to justify why we want to essentially claw that time back as employers.
Yep.
And that's where having a good why is very important, and identifying that as what your goals are, I think is a great starting point.
And I can tell you, Tom, commute is probably the number one reason. I mean, it really is. Even if it's a subway ride, it doesn't matter whether it's a car, it doesn't matter whether it's a highway, it doesn't matter. It's commute time. When you get that back, when you give that back to people and they have that time they're doing their jobs well, it's really hard to say, no, I need you back for 3 hours of your day in a meaningless transfer of your body from one place to another. That's hard to bring back.
Absolutely. It really is. So, Lynn, this has been great conversation. I know we're coming up on time here, so I don't want to belabor the point at all. But if you had to say, one last, big takeaway on the employer or employment branding side of things, do you have any last big keynotes that you would say, if you're going to hear one thing from today's conversation, this is it?
I do. I have thought about this a lot. I think that it's all about authenticity. I mean, I think you have to know exactly who you are as a company, and you have to, in order to be able to demonstrate that in any kind of meaningful way. And so the more time that you can spend on thinking about, what do you want people to know about working for your company? What is it like to work for your company? What do your happiest employees love about your company? Promote that authentically with the people who work there already. And on diversity and inclusion, have your ERG groups talk to the CEO, have them report in, have them have a voice on the blog, have them have a voice on your new products and new services. Use them as the resources that they are. It's really about being, not just giving lip service to all these important things. It's really about thinking it through and you can be different from the next company. You don't have to have the same goals and visions as the next company, but you have to be authentic in what your own are, and they should be reflective of the people you have working there.
I love it. Lynn, you have been a fountain of knowledge and information. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm excited to hear the feedback from everybody that's got a chance to listen to this, and know that we've got plenty more topics to be discussing and coming up with as we go throughout the rest of the year. So, Lynn, I will say thank you again very much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to everybody that tuned in, and be ready for our next podcast. It's going to be coming out in the next month. This is What Happens in Marketing from the Las Vegas Innovative Marketing Association. I'm Tom Heaton. I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much.